10 Myths About Being Single After 60, debunked by women who lived it. What if everything society has told you about being single after 60 is not just wrong, but completely backwards? Today, I'm sharing the 10 biggest myths about being single after 60, debunked by the women who are actually living this life and loving it more than you might imagine. Also, I'm about to share the unfiltered truth from over 100 women who've lived the reality of being single in their later years. Women who are tired of myths, tired of pity, and ready to set the record straight about what their lives actually look like. These aren't women who failed at relationships or who are desperately waiting to be rescued. These are women who've discovered something married people often envy: genuine contentment, financial freedom, and the rare luxury of living life entirely on their own terms. From the 47-year-old who calls herself the runaway bride after 7 engagements, to the 66-year-old who's had more friends and lovers than I can count. Their stories will challenge every assumption you've ever made about single life after 60. If you've ever felt sorry for the single woman at the dinner party, or if you've worried about your own future without a partner, or if you've simply wondered what life is really like for those who choose a different path, subscribe right now, because what you're about to hear will change everything you think you know about happiness, fulfillment, and what it really means to live well. Myth number 1. Single women are broken or flawed. Let's start with the most damaging myth of all, that something must be wrong with women who remain single into their 60s and beyond. A 62-year-old from California puts it perfectly. Older singles are no more or less likely to be flawed human beings than any other group. But we may be on the deeper side, and thus harder to know and/or have a harder time connecting as easily with others. Or we have higher standards and never found the right one. This myth assumes that marriage is the default state of human happiness, and anyone who deviates from this norm must be defective. But listen to this perspective from a 54-year-old in Pennsylvania. I think the biggest misperception is that I chose to be single, prioritized my career, or partied too much, or whatever. None of that is true. The reality is that a man never chose me. I wanted to build a life with someone, but he just never showed up. So I got on with it and built a life that didn't require a man beside me to keep it afloat. She continues with profound wisdom. Would I be happier if I were married? Who knows? I only know that what I have now, friends, family, financial stability, a nice home, works well enough. A man would be icing on the cake now, but the cake has been baked and it's delicious. The truth? Single women after 60 often possess qualities that make them harder to match: independence, financial stability, well-developed interests, and the wisdom to know what they will and won't accept. They're not broken, they're selective. They're not defective, they're complete. A 54-year-old from California sums this up beautifully. Myth: I'm too picky. Truth: I won't settle to avoid being alone. This isn't about being impossible to please. It's about understanding your worth and refusing to compromise on the fundamentals of what makes life fulfilling. Myth number 2. They're desperately lonely. Perhaps no myth is more persistent than the assumption that single women are drowning in loneliness, desperately waiting for someone to rescue them from their solitary existence. A 65-year-old from Oklahoma destroys this assumption. Most people have the preconceived notion that being single equals being lonely. There is a difference between being alone and being lonely. There are worse things out there than being lonely. This distinction between being alone and being lonely is crucial. Being alone is a circumstance. Being lonely is a feeling. Many single women have mastered the art of solitude.
creating rich inner lives and meaningful connections that fulfill them completely. But perhaps the most powerful testimony comes from a 55-year-old in Louisiana who describes his journey to what he calls peace. Every failed relationship brought me closer to the reality that I was going to die alone. But then, after my last breakup, I just hit autopilot, dug into my work, turned off the dating switch, and there it was, peace. He continued, I didn't need another person to achieve peace. I never knew that option was possible. No more arguments about silly things that have nothing to do with anything. No more lies or manipulations, just peace. I'm happier now than I have ever been. Yes, I am lonely sometimes, but I've realized that being lonely is just a step towards appreciating and celebrating your solitude. The revelation here is profound. Loneliness isn't the opposite of happiness. It's often a gateway to self-discovery and genuine contentment. Many single women have learned that temporary loneliness is a small price to pay for permanent peace. A 61-year-old from California captures this perfectly. If I've had a long day at work, I can come home to a nice quiet house, have a nice dinner and bath without anyone bothering me. I go grocery shopping in peace, and I get to watch whatever movie I want when I want to. I relish a good night's uninterrupted sleep, which I get most nights. The myth assumes that connection with others is the only cure for loneliness. The reality is that many single women have discovered that the deepest cure for loneliness is a genuine relationship with yourself.
Myth number 3. They're missing out on real family. Society often treats single, childless women as if they're living incomplete lives, missing out on the real family that supposedly makes life meaningful. A 47-year-old from Texas challenges this directly. One misconception is that I don't have a family. Even though I didn't get married, I still have an extended family I can and do spend time with. My extra time outside of work is spent on endeavors of my choosing, whether with family or personal interest activities. There is also a friend group I've known for decades and see frequently. She adds pointedly, people need to stop projecting their insecurities onto others. This projection is key to understanding the myth. Often the people who pity single women for not having family are struggling with their own family relationships and can't imagine that someone might have consciously chosen a different path. Consider this perspective from a 55-year-old who had children without marriage. I never married. I had 2 kids with a sperm donor. I have an incredible village helping me raise my kids, and I knew that going in. I can count on the fingers of one hand the number of times I've thought, this would be easier with a partner. More often than not, I see friends going through awful, painful divorces with a partner, kids caught in the middle, and I am so glad I never got married just to have kids. This woman created exactly the family structure she wanted without the complications that traditional marriage might have brought. Her village provides support and connection without the potential drama and conflict that can destroy nuclear families. The myth of missing out on real family ignores the reality that many single women have created rich, chosen families of friends, relatives, mentors, and community members who provide love, support, and belonging. These relationships are often deeper and more authentic than many traditional family structures because they're based on genuine affection rather than obligation. A 39-year-old from Georgia explains, I've built a life with friends, family, a career, and hobbies. Maybe without them, I would have prioritized a relationship more. The times when I feel uncomfortable being single are when other people pry into my private life or start questioning my decisions. The incomfort isn't coming from within. It's coming from others' inability to understand that family comes in many forms, and love doesn't require marriage certificates or shared DNA. Myth number 4. They'll regret their choices.
One of the most condescending myths is that single women will inevitably regret not marrying and having children, as if their current contentment is just delayed realization of their mistake. A 61-year-old from California destroys this myth completely. Myth: you'll regret not getting married and having kids. I learned long ago by watching other people get married and deal with their spouses and kids' problems that it wasn't the life for me. This isn't someone who avoided marriage out of fear or immaturity. This is someone who observed carefully and made an informed decision based on what she witnessed in others' lives. Another powerful testimony comes from a 61-year-old in Canada. I just knew from the time I was in my late teens, early 20s, all the reasons I didn't want to get married or have kids. At 61, I have no regrets. The choices I made are reaffirmed as the years go by, and I see the world changing. The phrase "reaffirmed as the years go by" is crucial. This isn't someone who's trying to convince herself she made the right choice. This is someone who becomes more certain of her path with each passing year. Consider this insight from someone who made conscious choices based on their own history. After a dysfunctional childhood, the opportunity to pass that legacy forward to another generation was not desirable. Being raised in a single-parent family due to death is difficult enough. But when the surviving parent makes conscious decisions to make your life as hard as possible, it led to none of my siblings or I wanting children. At this point in my life, early 60s, I have not had any regrets about my lack of any heirs. This person made a thoughtful decision to break a cycle of dysfunction rather than perpetuate it. Far from being something to regret, this represents profound wisdom and self-awareness. The regret myth assumes that everyone wants the same things and that those who choose differently must eventually realize their error. But the women sharing these stories aren't living in denial. They're living in gratitude for the paths they've chosen and the problems they've avoided.
Myth number 5. They're too picky or have impossible standards. Perhaps no myth is more frustrating to single women than the accusation that they're too picky or have unrealistic expectations that prevent them from finding love. The 47-year-old runaway bride who's been engaged 7 times provides fascinating insight. What I've realized is 2 things. The men in my life either wanted to change me once they put that ring on my finger, or they just gave up complete effort in our relationship once they thought they had me for life. This isn't about being too picky. This is about recognizing patterns of behavior that predict relationship failure. She learned that engagement often brought out the worst in her partners, either their controlling nature or their complacency. She continues, "I have come to realize I absolutely love being single. I don't have to be a mommy to anyone I didn't birth. I am not your maid nor your nanny. I can treat myself better than any man can and am free to do whatever I want without checking in with a warden." This woman isn't too picky. She's learned from experience what she will and won't accept. And she's discovered that her standards aren't impossible, they're just higher than what many men are willing to meet. A 50-year-old from New York offers another perspective. "I've had endless people advising me to get married while complaining about their spouse, or shortly after giving the advice, they're going through divorces. Some are okay as much as they can be, some are acrimonious." The irony is palpable. People in unhappy marriages advising single women to lower their standards and join them in misery. This woman observes, "It's a rare person who after 20 or 30 years of marriage actually really enjoys it. I'm sure there are out there, but it's the exception, not the rule, in my experience." The too picky myth assumes that any partnership is better than no partnership. But these women have learned that the wrong partnership is far worse than being alone. They'd rather be single and content than married and miserable. What others call too picky These women call having standards. What others see as unrealistic expectations, they see as refusing to settle for less than they deserve. Myth number 6. Single life is unlimited freedom and fun. While many myths paint single life negatively, there's also a myth that swings too far in the other direction, that single women live lives of endless freedom and constant fun, doing whatever they want, whenever they want. A 43-year-old from Arizona provides a reality check. People assume that as a childless single woman, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, and that it's so much fun to be free. There are many things I'm excluded from, and there are even more that aren't fun to do as a single person. She continues with specific examples. Solo exotic travel is just stressful. With a partner, most disasters become memories and stories to be retold. Solo, those same disasters can be really scary. All that fear never becomes a funny story. This insight reveals something important. Freedom comes with its own challenges. The ability to make your own decisions doesn't eliminate life's difficulties, it just means you face them alone. She also describes social exclusion. I'm surprised by how many things I'm excluded from, or if I am included, how differently I'm treated. I entertain frequently, and not one of the married couples has ever reciprocated the invitation. On the rare occasions when I get included, I'll frequently get squeezed in between two couples on a corner or seated at the overflow table. This social reality is rarely acknowledged. Single people often face subtle but persistent exclusion from social gatherings designed around couples. The freedom to do whatever you want means little if many social activities are structured in ways that make single participation awkward or unwelcome. But here's the crucial point. Acknowledging these challenges doesn't mean regretting the single life. It means understanding that every life choice comes with trade-offs. The women sharing these stories aren't complaining. They're providing honest assessments of what single life actually entails, beyond both the negative and positive myths. The freedom myth, while more positive than others, is still a myth because it oversimplifies the complex reality of navigating life without a built-in partner and social structure. Myth number 7. They're against marriage or commitment. Another persistent myth is that women who remain single must be fundamentally opposed to marriage or incapable of commitment. The truth is more nuanced, as a 50-year-old from New York explains. I am not against marriage, it just seems a tedious institution to me. This isn't anti-marriage ideology, it's personal assessment based on observation and experience. She continues, as a child, teenager, I wanted to be married and live happily ever after. Now, I'd run for the hills at the thought of getting married that young. This evolution from wanting marriage to finding it unappealing isn't about being against commitment. It's about understanding what commitment actually entails and deciding it's not worth the trade-offs involved. A 53-year-old from South Carolina provides another perspective. I didn't make a conscious decision not to have a husband and kids, it just worked out that way. My parents got married when they were 22, so I thought that was a good age for me too. However, while my fiancé was absolutely the right man, it was absolutely the wrong time for me to get married. She explains, I think there's a part of me that thought it was a checklist of required things to do in life. Graduate from college, get married, have kids. No one really said what to do when all the boxes were checked, and no one ever presented the list with the option of only checking off one box, a college degree. This reveals how many women were raised with marriage as an expectation rather than a choice. When they discovered they could check different boxes or create their own list entirely, marriage became optional rather than essential.
These women aren't against marriage in principle. They're simply not convinced it would improve their lives. They've observed enough marriages to understand both the benefits and costs, and they've decided the equation doesn't work for them.
Myth number 8, they'll have no one to care for them. One of the most persistent fears used to pressure women into marriage is the specter of aging alone, with no one to provide care during illness or declining health. A 61-year-old from Canada addresses this directly. Quote, "You'll be lonely, you won't have anyone to look after you, etc. Heard it all. Nothing could be further from the truth." End quote. But perhaps the most thoughtful response comes from a 56-year-old in Illinois. "While I may not have a spouse or children to care for me, I do have a strong circle of friends who are also single, and we can all see the potential to become our own support system for each other." This represents a sophisticated understanding of how to create security without traditional family structures. Rather than depending on one person, a spouse, or hoping adult children will be willing and able to provide care, she's creating a mutual support network with people who share similar circumstances and values. The myth assumes that marriage guarantees care in old age, but this ignores several realities. Spouses often die first. Adult children frequently live far away or have their own overwhelming responsibilities. And many marriages become adversarial during health crises rather than supportive. Single women who plan thoughtfully often create more robust support systems than those who assume marriage will solve all future problems. They invest in friendships, community connections, and professional care arrangements. They make financial plans that don't depend on a spouse's income or decisions. The care myth also ignores the reality that many married women end up caring for ailing husbands while receiving little support themselves. Being single eliminates the risk of becoming a caregiver for someone whose health fails before your own. Most importantly, these women are taking responsibility for their own futures, rather than hoping someone else will take care of them. This proactive approach often results in better outcomes than passive dependence on family members who may not be available or capable when the time comes.
Myth number 9, they're missing out on life's greatest joys. Society often presents marriage and children as life's ultimate fulfillment, suggesting that people who miss these experiences are living diminished lives. A 58-year-old from Canada offers a different perspective. "I got very sick at a young age with a lifelong chronic illness. And losing hope for love, I dedicated my life to my work and others. It has been an opportunity for contentment, and it's not the life I anticipated. I am at peace with it. Love, God, family, and friends. Content." This person found meaning and joy through service to others and spiritual connection. Her contentment isn't a consolation prize, it's genuine fulfillment discovered through a different path. A 39-year-old from Georgia explains her joy. "I choose how to spend my own money. I decorate how I want, spend my time how I want, and I can travel a lot. I do have great family and friends who support me." The assumption that marriage and children represent life's greatest joys ignores the reality that different people find fulfillment in different ways. For some, the greatest joy is financial independence. For others, it's the freedom to travel or pursue creative interests. For still others, it's the deep friendships and family relationships that flourish when not competing with spousal and parental obligations. The myth suggests a hierarchy of joy where married life sits at the top. But these women's testimonies reveal that joy is more horizontal than hierarchical. There are many paths to fulfillment, and none is inherently superior to others. A 50-year-old from New York captures this. "I think being single makes your life a lot more interesting than being in a marriage. I'm free to go to some very bizarre and interesting places at a moment's notice." This isn't someone trying to convince herself that her life is good enough.
This is someone who genuinely finds her life more interesting and fulfilling than the alternative she's observed in others.
Myth number 10. It's too late to change their minds. The final myth suggests that women who reach 60 without marrying are somehow locked into their path, unable to change course if they wanted to. A 53-year-old from South Carolina challenges this. For the most part, I am content with my life. Sometimes I look back and play what if, or get sad because I'm not where my much younger self thought I would be by now. But on the whole, I can't complain. I haven't ruled out getting married or having kids, but I also don't do anything to actively seek it out. This reflects a mature understanding that life remains open to possibilities while not being dominated by them. She's content with her current path, but not closed to alternatives if they arise naturally. A 60-year-old woman shares her pain at being called a spinster. I always wanted to get married and have a family since I was a little girl. I never even imagined I would go through life without a husband or children. I believe in my heart that things happen for a reason, but I always thought I would meet a wonderful man and would be married someday. Her honesty reveals that some single women at 60 are still open to partnership, still hoping for love. The myth that they've given up or are too set in their ways ignores the reality that the heart doesn't stop hoping just because time passes. But perhaps the most profound response comes from a 66-year-old. I've been alone some 66 years, never married, but I've had more friends and lovers than I can count. Being alone does not mean you must be lonely. I answered to the most important person I know, me. This person has lived fully as a single person while remaining open to connection. The path of singleness doesn't mean the path of isolation or the end of romantic possibility. The too late myth assumes that life becomes fixed and unchangeable at a certain age. But these women's stories reveal that life remains fluid, full of possibility, and open to surprise regardless of age or relationship status.
These 10 myths about being single after 60 all share a common thread. They underestimate women's capacity for self-knowledge, authentic choice, and genuine contentment outside traditional structures. The women who shared their stories aren't defensive about their choices. They're clear-eyed about both the benefits and challenges of single life. They're not trying to convince anyone that their path is superior. They're simply asking for their choices to be respected and understood. Perhaps the most profound insight comes from the 56-year-old in Illinois who wrote, "It was society's expectation to follow a certain path, and I bought into it, thinking I needed it for happiness. Once I learned about myself as a human being and realized I didn't see the same need as society, I let go of the traditional approach and began to see the many valuable elements in remaining single and unattached." This represents a fundamental shift from external validation to internal wisdom, from following prescribed paths to creating authentic ones. She continues, "I encourage everyone to find their own path and not feel pressured to follow what others expect." The myths persist because they serve others' comfort more than single women's reality. It's easier to assume that single women are broken, lonely, or in denial than to accept that they might have discovered something many married people haven't: genuine contentment with themselves and their choices. These women aren't asking for pity or praise. They're asking for recognition that their lives are valid, complete, and often deeply fulfilling. They've proven that happiness doesn't require marriage, that fulfillment doesn't require children, and that a life well lived can take many different forms. The 47-year-old runaway bride perhaps said it best: "Love yourself and love others." This simple wisdom captures what all these women have discovered, that the foundation of any good life is a healthy relationship with yourself. When you have that, partnership becomes a choice rather than a necessity. Marriage becomes an option rather than an obligation, and singleness becomes a valid path rather than a consolation prize. If these women's stories challenged your assumptions, inspired your thinking, or gave you permission to see singleness differently, Please subscribe and join our community of people who believe that every path to fulfillment deserves respect and understanding. Share in the comments, which myth did you find most surprising to see debunked? What have you learned from the single women in your life? Your insights could help break down these harmful stereotypes and create more understanding for the diverse ways people choose to live. Subscribe for more honest conversations about the many ways to live authentically, love genuinely, and find fulfillment on your own terms. Because as these 100+ women prove, there's no single path to a life well lived, only the courage to choose the path that's authentically yours. The greatest myth of all might be that there's only one way to be happy. These women's stories prove that happiness, fulfillment, and contentment come in as many forms as there are people seeking them.